Another Stephen King film. Those are always great, right? So I just got done watching HBO Max's reboot of Salem's Lot. If you didn't know, this has already had two TV adaptations, one from like 1979 and the other one which was released in 2004. So this is not the first time this material has been adapted to the screen, much like many other projects of King's that have been made into, let's say, less than stellar films in the last few years. I heard the It movies were good, I never saw them, but I did see Firestarter, and it was awful. And that might be the only Stephen King movie I've actually reviewed on this channel, but yeah, let's just say I'm usually not impressed with these films. And no, I have not read the book of this. I know my mother has, and she absolutely loves the book. I've heard that it's supposed to be one of the scariest horror novels ever made. And as someone who hasn't read the book, that didn't show in the film. Now, let me say this right off the bat. This is not a complete disaster. This is not a terrible film. And especially since I'm mostly going off of just as a film by itself. I did at least look at a synopsis of the novel, because I could just tell in areas where cuts and changes in story were made, and most of the time I was correct. Now, I'm going to talk about the movie as I'm not really going to go into a lot of the changes this movie makes until I talk about the ending. This is going to be a spoiler review. This movie's been out for at least a week, I think, and it's on HBO Max, so you can watch, if you have that, you can watch it anytime you want, so it's not exactly like I'm spoiling the next Avengers film the day it comes out, so, plus I don't know how many people are actually going to see this movie, because this has been getting trashed. Critics hate it, audiences hate it, so I'm obviously going to be the guy that's like, okay, I'm going to say this, it's not a good film. It's not. It's bad. But like I said, it's not terrible. It has some areas that I think are really good. So, the main plot of this is an author named Ben Mears returns to Salem's Lot, or it's Jerusalem's Lot, where he spent a small portion of his childhood but left after his parents died, and is back to basically do research on himself, because I think they were going for like a repressed memories type of thing, but it's worded so poorly in the film. Maybe it's expressed better in the book, I don't know. But the town is soon overrun by vampires, led by a leader named Barlow. And that's the basic premise of this film, and Ben teams up with a small group of residents in the town to fight back. That's about as basic a story rundown as I can get, and the main problem is that's as basic as the movie's version of the story is. Again, I've read the synopsis of the book, and it does go a bit, and it has a lot more to it. It has a bit more substance. But I will get into the good aspects of this film first, and probably the best aspect is the direction and the editing. This has a lot of style to it. This movie is probably a great example of style over substance because, like I said, the directing and the cinematography are pretty cool. It's got a lot of great edits to it, and the special effects mostly look good. There's a point during the climax where Ben is cornered between Susan, the love interest's mother, trying to kill him with a shotgun. It makes more sense if you've seen the film. I'll get into it in a little bit. And there's a zombie on fire because it's being exposed to sunlight, and the fire looks laughably bad, but other than that one scene, I think most of the special effects look pretty good. And the designs of the zombies are simple, or not the zombies, the vampires, are simple but effective. I don't need a shit ton of makeup and special effects to convey vampire. I really don't, and I think the movie's more subtle approach to how they look is pretty good. Other than the main vampire who shows up a couple of times, has a lot more makeup done to him, looks like Dracula from the last voyage of the Demeter, and it looks decent. I'm glad he wasn't on screen a ton of time because he did look a little silly, but again, I think it worked. And the climax of this film, while from what I've read, very different from the novel, and I'll get into that later, is actually pretty fun. So, yeah, so this, again, there's not like there's anything It's not like this movie is an abhorrent trash fire. Then we get to the acting, which is very inconsistent. And I mean that it's not like some people are good, some people are bad. I mean everybody has scenes where they're good, and then has scenes where it looks like a paycheck performance. And I don't recognize a ton of these actors. The main actor who plays Ben Mears is Lewis Pullman, who's the son of Bill Pullman, who is a fantastic actor. And again, just like everybody else, he has scenes where he looks really good, and then other scenes where it looks like a paycheck performance. And then the doctor, I knew I recognized the actress from somewhere, and despite this actress being in a ton of award-winning stuff, the thing I recognized her from was a 1-minute cameo in Captain America Civil War. Yeah, I'm that guy. But yeah, that's about all I have to say about the acting. I will say probably the cop and who was the other guy? Probably the cop and the Reverend are probably the best performances in the film. They have probably the least, probably because they have less screen time, so they have less scenes where it looks like I don't care, I'm just here for a paycheck performance. Because again, it's like every other actor, they'll have scenes where they're good, and then other ones where, and especially, it's really weird with the kid Mark, because his acting isn't bad, but then you get the scene where one of his friends, I believe his name was Danny, where he's obviously one of the first people to be turned into a vampire. He shows up at his window, obviously, like, with glowing eyes and the teeth and everything, and while his body acting is conveying that he's freaked out by this, he has, like, no expression throughout that entire scene. Now, in the small portion where he's being hypnotized by him, I understand that. But throughout the rest of the scene, he should be looking freaking terrified about seeing his friend back from the dead with these glowing eyes and the sharp teeth, obviously a freaking vampire, and he has, like, no reaction. It was weird. Maybe it was a directing problem. Maybe the director didn't know what to do here. So, and one thing I will say, this is produced by James Wan, who made the Conjuring universe and obviously directed the Aquaman films. Maybe that is why this movie has a bit of style to it, because the Aquaman movies, despite their faults, their style is really what made those films. And I talked about that in the film Face-Offs I did with the second Aquaman and Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters. So, maybe that was why this movie had a bit of style to it. But my main problem is the story. Because, again, not just because the story is clearly gutted from the novel, but because it almost feels like the story moves at a snail's pace. Despite the fact that quite a bit happens throughout the entire runtime, it feels like it's just slowly dragging on. It almost kind of feels like the majority of the time, it feels like a pilot episode of a TV show, not the first 3/4 of a movie that doesn't even clock in at 2 hours. I believe the movie clocks in about roughly an hour 53, including, let's say, 6 or 7 minutes of credits. So, and about an hour 45 movie, and about 3/4 of that feels like a pilot episode of a 10 episode season of television. So that tells you the pace, and then the last little bit of it moves really quickly because we kind of get right to the climax, which I'm totally okay with. I didn't want to see a shitload of time in them in this dead town. They immediately go to where everything is, and I will give credit, like I said, to the climax. Not only were there very obvious setups and payoffs, because there's a scene early in the film where Ben and Susan are at a drive-in movie, and I figured they say that the vampires where they're hiding needs to be a place to fit the entire town, and as soon as they said that, my mind's like, okay, it's the movie theater, and that's exactly where it was. And then they're looking around, where could they be? And again, I figured out, because there was a scene earlier where there was like 6 people in the same car, and they had a few people in the trunk, because it's the 80s, and of course they did. But immediately my mind thought to that, and I'm like, oh, they're in the cars. They're in the trunks. The trunks, because you can't get sunlight in there, and they're essentially coffins. And again, that's what it was. And it wasn't a case of me being ahead of the film. It was a case of very easy to make setup and payoff. And I much respect that, other than just pulling out some Deus Machina bullshit where they were. it works. Not every part of the script is terrible. And the characters are, while they're not very interesting, most of the heroes are mostly likable. They're likable enough to the point where I wanted to see them survive. And I will give credit that they actually kill off the love interest, which does not happen a lot in films. And I know people are going to tell me it's from the book, yet no shit, that doesn't change anything. So now I want to get into a couple of things, especially near the end, that were changed from the novel. Okay, first of all, there's Jimmy Cody, the doctor from the novel, was gender swapped in this film. Because of fucking course he was. Because it's modern Hollywood, they had to have some woke bullshit thrown in there. But aside from that, there's a distinct lack of, how should I put this? Substance, because a lot of the first half of the film mainly consists of jump scares that aren't, again, the book is supposed to be one of the scariest horror novels ever written, and this movie just kind of feels like a jump scare fest. There are a couple times where it worked, even though I saw it coming. Like, there's a point where, I forget the character's name, but he's, like doing something, he's, like, looking through, like, vampire books and everything to figure things out, and he's looking in a mirror, and you can clearly see his reflection in a mirror, and there's nothing else behind him, and I'm like, okay, I know what's gonna happen, vampires don't show up in a mirror, he's gonna turn around, and it's gonna be there. And, again, that's exactly what happened, but again, I feel like that's more setup and payoff than it is lazy writing, than it is me being too ahead of the writer. So then there's the climax, where in the novel, there really is no climax. And here they actually have to fight the vampires, which I'm totally okay with. I like how they do it, and I like that they actually had some creative moments. Like when the projector screen is like blocking out the sun while it's going down so that the vampires are able to get up and move and attack both Mark and Ben, and Mark gets the idea to get in a car and drive and slamming into the pillars that are holding the thing up to knock it down, essentially killing all the vampires in one shot. That was actually really creative. And then when he runs over Susan's mother, who has a shotgun trying to kill Ben, I laughed my ass off because that was fucking awesome. So I will say, in the novel, they do kill Barlow. They do fight and kill Barlow in the novel, but then they leave the town. And then they come back about a year later, I think it said, to essentially finish the job to kill off the rest of the vampires that now don't have a leader. And essentially what Ben does, he starts a brush fire, intending to basically destroy the town and kill all of them at once because, well, there's really nothing left of the town at that point. Not that the town is destroyed before that, but it's a ghost town. And this time, like, literally, it's not a ghost town in the sense of, like, oh, there's, like, a couple hundred people that live in this town. Like, no, everybody in this town is dead now. So I don't think lighting the town on fire is going to be the biggest loss. But here instead they actually killed them during the climax before they killed Barlow. And from a narrative perspective and how the movie was done, I don't mind this. Again, I'll only complain about a change if it actively makes the movie worse. And while I do think the book's ending is a bit more I think is a bit more interesting how they do it in the novel, but again, that's personally what I think. So yeah, even though I think the book's ending is a bit more interesting, I had no problem with how the movie did the ending. But yeah, the big problem with this movie is that even taking out the knowledge that I have of the book now by reading that synopsis, this story just feels gutted. It feels like there are several scenes missing in this film. The dialogue isn't always great. Again, the characters, even though they're likable enough, aren't exactly very interesting, and the story moved so slowly that, again, it felt like a pilot episode of a TV show. Honestly, I think had that been a pilot episode of a TV show, of maybe like a 10-episode show, maybe that could have worked, but again, the way they framed it, it was, this book would not work as a show, probably. Like, they made a TV miniseries. Those miniseries usually suck. I've seen the Shining miniseries, and let's just say I will much rather stick with the Kubrick film, because that is superior in every fashion. Every fashion. Maybe this Halloween I'll do a video on good and bad Stephen King films, because a lot of them are bad. But I think this is only the second one I've ever touched. And again, the other one being Firestarter. Because there are a couple of the films I like. Ironically, probably my favorite one being The Shining is the one he fucking hated. But, yeah, so that's really all I got for Salem's Lot. I'm gonna give this a C. This is like this is the average film. That's it. I'll probably never watch it again. I'll probably never think about it again. But it didn't hurt me to watch this for 2 hours. It was perfect. This wasn't a movie where I constantly wanted to skip ahead. It was perfectly adequate. So that's all I got, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.